Okay, our next adjustment to discuss is gradient. Now, this is one where when you click on your adjustment layer, create new filler adjustment layers, you're going to see all the different adjustment layers that we've been talking about here, including these are really called fill layers, the top three. And you could also potentially be accessing these by going up to layer and then down to new adjustment layer from within the application bar, and you're going to see them all listed here, with the exception of there's no gradient, there's no solid fill color, there's no pattern, and those are technically classified a little bit differently under fill layer. So you have your fill layers and your adjustment layers. So we are talking about fill layers here within this category that I'm calling fill layer adjustments. But when it comes to gradients, let's just do some gradient basics before we get into looking at how these can kind of affect photos, just so we understand the controls a little bit more. And there are different ways to add a gradient and then start to tweak the way that it looks. So one way to add it is right through your layers window, going into that that gradient fill layer, clicking it, and then it's going to make a gradient right there. I could start to adjust the settings. Another way, of course, is as I showed you, it's the same thing, but going to fill layer gradient, it's going to not immediately plop one into the layers, but it's going to say, do you want to create a new layer? And you have some initial controls here related to maybe it starts with a blend mode, maybe it has an overall opacity change, or whatever, and then you can click OK. Then this same thing pops up and you can start to adjust the specific looks of it. And another more dynamic way to get into starting your gradient is there is a gradient tool within your toolbar, keyboard shortcut G. And when you click on that and then start to click and drag over top of your canvas, it creates a gradient fill. And right over top of your imagery now, you have this little dynamic bar that allows you, first of all, to change the angle of it, but also, in conjunction with your options or control bar up above, you can, specify whether you want it to be a linear gradient, going left to right or top to bottom or whatever angle, or if you want it to be like a radial gradient that's going to be moving out from a center point. And of course I'm just using black and white or black to transparent gradients right now to show you this. And there's other types of gradient shapes up here too that you might use at some point or another, the radial and linear being the two most common. So then from there, say, okay, I have a gradient started, this is looking good. I double click on it from within layers, and it does bring up this initial dialog box. And from within here, I could go through and do some basic edits, like picking colors and picking preset gradients or whatever I might want to do. But typically what you'll want to do is just say, this is fine. Notice usually when I double click on the adjustment layer from within layers, it brings up properties and it gives you, all the options to control and continue to edit. But double clicking this gradient fill does not bring up properties. It brings up a separate gradient fill dialog box. And so you do actually typically want to click on properties itself. And then you're going to have the gradient adjustment more, with more controls and more ability to really change things up. It has those initial gradient controls built into it, of course, but then also there's some other stuff. And this works pretty easily too. So for example, I can click here. I can say I want to change that from black to a color. I want to change that from white to a different color. I can add another color in the middle by just clicking and, finding, just click as many times as you want to add more and more colors. And then you can slide around essentially the ratio, how long is the red on screen before it starts to transition to blue versus how long it transitions to yellow. And you have these additional sliders that control how long is it blue before it really starts to transition. And if I compress it, this is just solid red all the way up until this bubble. Now the gradient begins. Then it transitions to blue. Then it transitions back to yellow. But since I've pinched the gradient here too, it's just solid yellow from that point. Or I can stretch it all the way back out and have it gradate much more gently from side to side, right? So your sliders, very useful. And then also being able to look down below there and control opacity of any point along the gradient too, meaning how transparent is the gradient. Right now it's 100% opaque. You can't see through it to any underlying imagery, even though I've got a photo under there, for example. But if I click on this and reduce the opacity of, in this case, the orange, then you can see, oh, okay, within the orange area, I'm able to see through this. Still can't see through the yellow because it's not opaque, right? But if I take that yellow and I reduce the opacity of it, whoops, and I want to click on the right bubble, then use my slider, then I can start to reduce the opacity of it. And I can put additional stops along the way, just like up above. For example, I could make it opaque on the outside, or I could make it transparent on the outside edges by having, reduced opacity here and here. But in the center, I could have it be fully opaque again. And so we're not able to see through it in the middle, but then it transitions out toward the edges and becomes transparent again. So very dynamic, and you just kind of change things up as you go using all of these different sliders. And then, of course, from there, you do have the ability on a gradient to create a mask, just like with any other adjustment or fill layer. So if I then go in with my brush and I start to hide parts of that gradient by painting black pixels over part of it to mask it off, then obviously the gradient is not going to be visible everywhere. So we'll talk a little bit more about some additional things you can do with these and how they look with photos, but that is kind of a gradients introduction.